Hello, my friends. Today, I'd like to start with a very interesting statement from the United States. A spokesperson for the US State Department says that Russia's strikes on Ukrainian cities must stop immediately. And of course, Russia listened by launching another wave of Shahed drones and missiles into Ukrainian territory. Overall, the situation isn't improving, and on the front lines, the Russians continue to slowly advance. So let's go through things step by step, starting with the Sumy region. Here, the Russians continue the attacks, trying to break through at least to the water barrier and reach new settlements. But so far, Ukrainian forces are managing to hold the line, and even though the gray zone has expanded and the number of attacks isn't going down, the Russians still haven't been able to push their defense further. Over the past day, the front line here has remained unchanged. However, the Russians keep pulling in reserves, and recently there were reports of equipment columns coming in from Crimea. This suggests that activity in this area will increase in the coming days, but the Ukrainian side has also reported moving in additional reserves to prevent the Russians from getting closer to the city of Sumy. So we'll wait. Okay. As for the offensive on Russian territory. The Russians are trying to claim that Ukrainian forces have been pushed out of the Toretsk area, but our units are still trying to move forward, although there haven't been any major gains yet. In the Kharkiv direction, the Russians are storming the village of Gleboke and shell on the frontline areas. Over the past day, they haven't made any progress, but as we can see, the activity has slightly increased after a long period of quiet. In the Vovchansk area, the fighting also continues, but Ukrainian forces are managing to repel all attacks, and the front line hasn't changed over the past 24 hours. Near Dvorichna, the Russians are trying to break through around the village of Kamyanka, but overall, along this section of the front, there hasn't been much activity and the situation remains stable. In the Kupyansk direction, the Russians are assaulting Kindrashivka and Golubivka, trying to stretch the flank in order to encircle Kupyansk. They're also pushing toward Glushkivka and launching attacks on Kolesnikivka. So the situation here is tense as the Russians are attempting to approach Kupyansk from two sides. Attacks near Stepova Novoselivka also continue, but over the past 24 hours, the front line hasn't changed. In the Borova direction, the Russians are attacking Boguslavka and Zeleny High. For now, there is no major activity in other areas here, and all attacks are being successfully repelled by the Ukrainian forces. In the Lyman direction, the situation has worsened. Activity here is much higher, and the Russians are trying to build on their recent gains. Today, they are also storming the village of Karpivka and attempting to fully secure their positions there. Fighting is also ongoing near Novy Mir and Olhivka. Here, the Russians are trying to expand the territory under their control by breaking into the Ukrainian defenses and pushing toward the water barrier with a broad front. However, so far they haven't succeeded, and over the past 24 hours, the front line remains unchanged. In the Siversk direction, the Russians launched one attack on Grigorivka, but there have been no further activity in this area, so the front line here also remains stable. In the Kostyantynivka direction, the Russians are assaulting Stupochki and pushing through near Kurdyumivka. Battles are ongoing for Deliyevka, Sherbinivka, and Yablonivka. Soldiers on the ground describe the situation like this. Kostyantynivka direction. Near the highway to Kostyantynivka, the Russians have taken a few tree lines and are slowly advancing north of the road towards Stepanivka. Artillery, aviation, and drones are extremely active. In short, the front is roaring. Around Yablonivka, Russian Rubicon systems are working. Any equipment north of the village is being destroyed. It's extremely difficult for us to launch attacks. Inside the settlement itself, the Russians are trying to push deeper, but we are repelling their counterattacks. The fields to the south are fully taken. The Russians also destroyed two M130 APCs south of Alexandro-Kalinove. Fighting continues for the southern part of the village, and now Sherbynivka, Katerynivka, and Klemenbyk are under threat. Slowly, the Russians are approaching the city from the south and southeast. On the eastern flank, there is fierce fighting for the southern part of Stupochki. It's extremely intense. While our guys are holding off this horde with titanic effort, it's critical to secure our rear. Losing equipment near the front lines is one thing, but losing it in the rear, that's completely unacceptable. The question of strikes on the Slavyansk, Kramatorsk, Drushkivka, Kostyantynivka roads is only a matter of time, and we don't know when. Still, no protective netting above our heads. Where is it? How much longer do we have to wait? What the hell is going on? Our military needs a secure logistical route. So today, it's extremely important that the regional military administration hears this and does everything possible and even impossible to ensure the safe movement of Ukrainian forces. Lives and the stability of the frontline defense depend on it. In the Pokrovsk direction, the situation remains the same. The Russians are shelling all frontline settlements to the max. They are also using FPV drones to control every logistic route, and still no protective measures have been implemented for the routes. Because of this, the front is starting to falter here too. We saw it just days ago near Malinivka. Today, the Russians are already breaking through closer to Novoekonomichne through the fields. They are also assaulting Mirolyubivka, the village of Promень, Lysivka, Chunishine, and are pushing toward the outskirts of Pokrovsk. Fighting is ongoing near Kotlene, Udachne, and Novosergiyevka. The situation is extremely difficult, although there haven't been any changes to the front line in the past 24 hours. In the Novopavlivka direction, the Russians continue to assault Muravka, Gorihove, Zelený Kut, and the village of Zaporizhzhia. As it appears, after a significant breakthrough, they moved on to storming the next settlements. Unfortunately, based on statements from Ukrainian soldiers, the so-called gray zone has already shifted into the Dnipropetrovsk region. Since Russian forces have entrenched themselves near the border, fighters report that the Russians are now breaking into this new region, though they have been successfully eliminated there. There are just 4 kilometers, 300 meters left to the outskirts of Novopavlivka, and only 12.5 kilometers from the edge of the current front line to the town of Mezhova. This poses a very serious threat. If the Russians begin advancing in this direction, they will likely attempt to cut the Pavlograd Pokrovsk highway near the village of Slavyanka. At the very least, they'll try to take control of it using FPV drones. Because of this, the situation here is deteriorating rapidly, and it's already been reported that the list of settlements subject to evacuation in the Dnipropetrovsk region is expanding. The same is happening in the Kharkiv region. In both the Kharkiv and Dnipropetrovsk regions, mandatory evacuation zones are being expanded. Taking into account the safety situation in Kupyansk district, a decision has been made to mandatorily evacuate residents from 7 villages in the Shevchenkivska community. These include Baranivka, Berezivka, Novomykolаivka, Spodobivka, Starovanya, Duvanka, and Fedorivka. Yesterday, the Dnipropetrovsk Regional Military Administration also announced the expansion of evacuations, specifically the forced evacuation of families with children from frontline areas of Sinelnikov district. In the Velika Novosilka area, the Russians are storming the villages of Shevchenko, Vilne Pole, and Zelene Pole. There is also a high volume of shelling reported, but no changes in the front line were recorded over the past day. In the Gulay Pole direction, the Russians are assaulting Malinivka and continuing their shelling. Over the past day, they were unable to advance, so for now the front line remains unchanged. In the Zaporizhzhia direction, the Russians are not decreasing the activity and continue to launch attacks in the area of Nesteryanka, as well as assaults on Novoandriivka, Pavlivka, and Stepove. This area is seeing intense use of FPV drones and artillery, but despite that, the front line hasn't shifted over the past day. In the Kherson direction, Russian forces continue attacks on the islands and are actively using FPV drones in the frontline zone. Artillery strikes on the right bank also haven't stopped. However, no changes in the front line have been recorded in the past 24 hours. Russian troops are still failing to break through to the right bank. Meanwhile, Merz commented on the latest attacks on Ukraine.
The recent massive Russian attacks on Kiev and other cities once again targeted civilians and were against serious war crimes. These were not military targets, they were attacks against the civilian population. Russia deliberately and mercilessly struck civilians using numerous drones and cruise missiles. This was anything but a proportionate response to Ukraine's very precise strikes on military bases, airfields, and infrastructure last week.
As we can see, Ukraine is striking military targets accurately, while Russia continues retaliatory attacks on civilian areas. At the same time, Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orbán responded to President Zelensky's statement about Hungary's alleged desire to take over Zakarpattia. Hungarians don't want to die for Ukraine, Orban said, reacting to Zelensky's interview. President Zelensky lashed out at us because Hungarians don't want to die for Ukraine. We don't want our children coming home in coffins from the front lines, and we don't want Hungarian money going to Ukraine. In general, we now wait to see how the situation will develop further. And that's all from me. So please don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell to stay updated on all the latest news. Thank you for watching and see you next time. Bye bye.